Imagine being locked inside a glass structure in the middle of the desert. No way out, no fresh air from outside, no food that wasn't grown right there. Just the same 7 people every single day for 2 years, with nowhere to go and no escape. It sounds like the premise of a psychological thriller. But this actually happened in 1991 in Arizona. 8 people voluntarily locked themselves inside a glass dome in the Arizona desert. They had food, water, air, and each other. They had planned for everything. And within months, the whole thing began to fall apart. What they did not expect was that the greatest threat inside that dome would not be the failing crops, or the vanishing oxygen, or the insects taking over the walls. It would be each other. This is the story of Biosphere 2. And it is not the story most people think they know. Most people who have heard of Biosphere 2 know the broad outline. A sealed artificial ecosystem, 8 scientists, 2 years. A bold experiment in human self-sufficiency, the kind of project that sounds on the surface like a triumph of ambition and scientific vision. But ambition and vision are not the same thing as preparation. And what happened inside that dome over those 2 years was something that the people who built it, funded it, and lived inside it were not fully prepared for at all. The structure itself was extraordinary. Built in Oracle, Arizona, at a cost of around $200 million, Biosphere 2 was a sealed glass and steel habitat covering more than 3 acres of desert land. Inside, it contained a tropical rainforest, a savanna, a desert, a saltwater ocean with a living coral reef, a freshwater marsh, and an agricultural zone designed to feed 8 people entirely from what they could grow themselves. Every ecosystem on Earth, miniaturized and enclosed beneath a single roof. The man behind the vision was not a government scientist or a NASA engineer. His name was John Allen. He was part philosopher, part inventor, part something harder to define. He had spent decades building intentional communities around the world, developing what he believed was a new model for how human civilization could relate to the natural world. Biosphere 2 was, in many respects, the culmination of that vision, and the 8 people he selected to live inside it were not strangers pulled from a list of applicants. They were people who had already spent years inside his orbit. That detail would matter more than almost anyone realized at the time. On September 26, 1991, the airlock sealed. 8 people stepped into a world of their own making. And for several weeks, everything looked exactly as it was supposed to look. The crew established routines, they tended their crops, they monitored their ecosystems, they documented their findings. From the outside, Biosphere 2 appeared to be working. The press coverage was largely positive. The project was being spoken about as a milestone, a prototype for the space colonies of the future, proof that humanity could sustain itself beyond Earth. Then the oxygen started disappearing. It happened slowly. The measurements were consistent, but not alarming at first. Oxygen levels inside the sealed atmosphere were dropping week by week, at a rate that had not been modeled in the experiment's design. Within months, the concentration had fallen to a point equivalent to living at an altitude of several thousand feet. The crew were not in immediate danger, but they were living in air that was noticeably thinner than what human beings are built to breathe comfortably. The fatigue came first. Then difficulty concentrating. Then disrupted sleep. Then the growing awareness that something in the system was not behaving the way it had been designed to behave. The cause, once investigated, came down to the soil. The rich organic material used to populate the agricultural zones was decomposing at a far higher rate than anticipated, consuming oxygen in quantities that the plants inside could not replenish through photosynthesis. The concrete used in construction was also absorbing carbon dioxide, pulling it out of the atmosphere and further distorting the balance. These were not minor calculation errors. They pointed to something more fundamental. The model of how a sealed biosphere would function had been built on assumptions that the reality inside the dome was now quietly disproving. The management team outside made a decision. They would pump oxygen into the structure to keep the levels survivable. And here is where the story shifts. Biosphere 2 had been presented to the world as a closed system. That was the entire premise. A self-sustaining, sealed environment, independent from the outside world, capable of supporting human life indefinitely. The moment external oxygen entered through that airlock, that claim was no longer true. Not entirely, not in the way it had been stated. The decision was made, and for a period of time, it was not publicly disclosed. When it eventually came out, the scientific community's reaction was not subtle. Critics who had already raised questions about the experiment's methodology now had a specific and concrete failure to point to. The experiment had required external intervention to remain livable. The seal had been broken, and the people running the project had chosen not to say so immediately. That choice would follow Biosphere 2 for the rest of its history. But outside scrutiny was not the only pressure building. Inside the dome, something else was happening that no press release would cover for a very long time. The 8 biospherians had split into 2 groups, 4 against 4. The fracture did not happen overnight. It developed across weeks and months of accumulated tension, unresolved disagreements, and the particular kind of pressure that comes from living in permanent proximity to people you cannot escape. There was nowhere to go. No separate building, no way to create genuine distance, no mechanism to step outside the conflict and let it settle. Whatever existed between people had to be carried every single day inside a sealed glass structure in the Arizona desert. One of the crew, Jane Pointer, later wrote extensively about what this felt like from the inside. She described the experience not as dramatic confrontation, but as something more corrosive. A gradual erosion of the sense that the group was a unit with a shared purpose. Meals began to be eaten separately. Communication between the factions became transactional at best. The social architecture that was supposed to hold the experiment together had fractured along lines that had probably existed before the airlock ever closed. And this is the part that changes how you understand the entire project. The 8 people selected for Biosphere 2 were not strangers to each other. They had been part of John Allen's extended network for years. Some had lived and worked together in his intentional communities before the experiment began. The bonds between them were old, and so were the tensions. What the sealed environment did was not create new conflicts. It removed every tool that human beings normally use to manage the conflicts that already exist. The walk away, the change of scene, the conversation with someone outside the situation, the simple act of physical separation. None of those things were available inside Biosphere 2, and without them, small frictions that might have resolved naturally in any other context became permanent features of daily life. The neuroscience of what happens to people under these conditions is not speculative. Prolonged confinement with no ability to disengage from a social environment degrades emotional regulation. It makes small things feel disproportionately large because the brain has no other stimuli to balance them against. Decision-making becomes less reliable. Patience erodes. The capacity to extend goodwill to people who frustrate you diminishes in measurable, physiological ways. These were intelligent, motivated, carefully selected people. They had trained for this. They had wanted this. And the environment still did to them what isolation does to everyone. Meanwhile, the food situation was deteriorating alongside everything else. The agricultural zone was designed to sustain 8 people for 2 years. In practice, it could not reliably do so. Crops underperformed. Species that had been accidentally sealed inside the dome, including cockroaches and several varieties of ant, had found conditions ideal for population explosion. They multiplied rapidly and damaged plant life in ways the agricultural models had not accounted for. The carefully balanced food system began producing less than it needed to, and the crew lived for months in a state of persistent, low-grade hunger. Over time, the physical effects became undeniable. Crew members lost significant body weight. The caloric deficit was not severe enough to be immediately life-threatening, but it was constant, and chronic hunger does not simply affect the body. It narrows perspective, it shortens tempers. It makes the already difficult work of maintaining functional relationships under extreme isolation considerably harder. By the second year, the crew of Biosphere 2 were physically depleted, psychologically strained, divided into opposing factions, breathing supplemented air inside a system that had not performed as designed, and doing all of this while aware that the outside world was beginning to question whether the experiment had scientific validity at all. It is not a small thing that all 8 of them finished. On September 26, 1993, the airlock opened, 2 years to the day after it had closed. The Biospherians walked out into the Arizona desert. They were thinner. Some looked visibly changed in ways that photographs from that day make difficult to describe precisely. They had completed something. Whether it was what they had set out to complete was a question that would take years to answer honestly. The aftermath was, in some ways, as strange as the experiment itself. Ed Bass, the billionaire who had funded the project, lost confidence in the leadership structure John Allen had built. In 1994, he moved to replace the management team. The transition was not smooth. Several of the original Biospherians aligned themselves with Allen against the new management. 2 of them were physically removed from the property after entering the facility and opening the airlock seals, an act they described as protest, and the new management described as sabotage. The police were called. The people who had spent 2 years sealed inside Biosphere 2 were now locked out of it entirely. Columbia University eventually took over scientific management of the site. Mainstream researchers who examined the data and the structure found value in some of what had been recorded, but the project's reputation in the scientific community had been permanently shaped by the controversies surrounding it. The closed methodology, the lack of independent oversight, the delayed disclosure of the oxygen supplementation, and the intensely personal nature of the group at its center had made Biosphere 2 something that serious science struggled to fully embrace. What the experiment had actually demonstrated was not quite what it had set out to demonstrate. It had not proven that a sealed biosphere could sustain human life indefinitely. It had proven something more complicated and, depending on how you look at it, more valuable. It had shown how quickly the systems we build begin to diverge from the models we design them from. It had shown that the human element in any closed system is not a variable that can be fully controlled, predicted, or prepared for. And it had shown, in real time and in documented detail, what happens to a group of people when the normal mechanisms of social relief are removed and there is no exit from the pressure of living in permanent proximity to each other. None of that was what the brochures said, but all of it was real. The dome still stands in Oracle, Arizona. It is now operated by the University of Arizona as a research facility, and it continues to be used for legitimate scientific work in ecology and climate science. The glass still catches the desert light in the same way it did in 1991. From the outside, it still looks like someone's idea of a perfect world. What the experiment revealed in the end was not a blueprint for survival beyond Earth. It was something quieter and more unsettling. that when you seal human beings away from the world, strip away the structures and escapes and distances that ordinary life provides, and ask them to function as a unit under sustained pressure, what emerges is not the best version of what people can be. It is the most honest one. The Biospherians went in believing they were going to show humanity its future. What they showed instead was something closer to its nature, and that, perhaps, is the more important discovery. Now, after everything you've heard, I want to ask you something directly. Biosphere 2 was voluntary. These 8 people chose to go in. They knew it would be difficult. They trained for years. And still, within months, the group fractured, the system failed. And the experience left marks that some of them are still processing decades later. So here is the question I keep coming back to. If you were offered a place inside a project like this, sealed away for 2 years with 7 other people, no exit, no outside world, would you go? And if you would, what do you think that says about you? And if you wouldn't, what does that say about all of us?